This is Roy. Now I know I've made plenty of videos on plenty of characters, but this one is special to me. Roy is an intriguing character as he's beloved, but unfortunately, he's got too many flaws to be a viable character in Melee's meta. Melee being the game where Roy first debuted as a Marth clone, and you know what, I'm just gonna be honest here, I've always wanted Roy to be good. When I went to my very first Melee tournament back in the day, yes, I got 4-stocked every game, I was playing Gold Roy. Because of course I wanted to play the character with fire, that's a no-brainer. When I first wrote this video, I was gonna dunk on Roy the whole time and just call it a day. It was gonna be me throwing 3-pointer shots at Roy and him just getting dunked on every time, but low-key I do want Roy to succeed. I love when Roy wins because it gives people hope. And sure, the best Roy in the world is also the best player in the world. Of course he's gonna have a good pocket character. Roy's the type of character where if you even win a match with him, it's impressive. And trust me, it's never happened to this day where I've lost to a Roy, but if it did happen, my pride definitely could not take that hit. He's considered so bad that if he wins at all, it's honestly insane. However, it's easier said than done. The thing you quickly figure out whether you play Roy competitively or not, he's not easy to play. I felt bad for Roy. He never appeared in Brawl, seemingly being replaced by another blue sword fighter. He didn't return in Smash 4 until it was a later release as DLC, where he was actually leaked in a balance patch where they accidentally left some data that could be activated and showed that Roy and Ryu were going to be Smash 4 DLC. Good times. It's quite apparent Roy in the later Smash games like Smash Ultimate was the actual realized version of the character. Melee's development is so cutthroat, last minute in order to pad out the roster, they added a handful of clone characters. And that's fine and all, but sometimes these clone characters weren't nearly as fleshed out as they should have been, leading to why we're here with Roy today. Roy on paper is supposed to be the more quote-unquote aggressive version of Marth. Sakurai himself has stated Roy was made to be the hot-headed character, which makes sense as fire is a big part of his moveset visually. Roy was made into a fast faller, Marth is a little bit more floaty compared to him. Roy's hitboxes are placed at the hilt of the sword, while Marth's is placed at the tip of his sword. Roy's airspeed is slightly higher than Marth's, and on paper he doesn't sound too bad. He's essentially the tails to Marth's heads. He's the inverse of Marth in almost every single way, even tier list wise. Okay, I know that was a low blow. Stay tuned if you want a happy ending for Roy. Remember when I said he was a fast faller? Well, his jump and up special aren't high enough at all, so Roy actually falls harder than a stone being thrown off a cliff. This is actually a huge negative as a bad recovery in Melee is a death sentence, as the higher tiered characters tend to have amazing recovery options. I mean, look at Marth. Because he's not a fast faller and yet his up special goes higher than Roy's, it means Marth's recovery is not a problem. Roy's jump squat is also a frame slower than Marth's, which means if you press the jump button, it's a whole frame slower than Marth's. I've noticed this even back in the day. It makes Roy feel more heavy and less responsive, and it means if Roy is going to do an aerial, he's just going to be slower than Marth. Roy's combo ability is extremely limited because his hitbox placements are near the hilt of the sword. It means Roy has to scrap to gain advantage, and that wouldn't be a problem if Roy's negatives weren't so terrible. Because he has to scrap to get in, it means he has to play aggressively in order to gain percent, but the problem is that Roy's moveset feels really incomplete, so it doesn't really meld well with what he's trying to be in Melee. Here's his glorious dash attack. If you're unaware of this move's lack of potential, his dash attack is programmed incorrectly because it's active for the same amount of frames as Marth's dash attack, even though both of these dash attacks have different speeds. Kind of a big flaw there. His gnar doesn't even link into the second hitbox correctly. Plenty of his moves have too much startup and end lag compared to Marth's, even having smaller hitboxes like his up tilt or F tilt. Roy's down smash is night and day worse than Marth's. The only difference is the front hit does more damage while having higher startup and end lag, and being slower in general. His aerials are worse than Marth's because they have so much more end lag, and because his jump squat is still way slower than Marth's, it means Roy is terrible in the air. And on top of that, his sweet spot on the hilt of his sword for some reason is smaller than Marth's, which to this day I don't know why this is the case. This means Roy's ability to scrap is even worse because there's essentially less reward for hitting Roy's sweet spot, while Marth gets crazy amount of reward when he hits his sweet spot. It's a bit inconsistent. Now I don't want to rag on Roy forever However, he does have some positives. Unfortunately, these positives aren't enough to save his character archetype. There are some kernels of good here, like his down tilt, for example. While Marth's down tilt is mostly used for poking and edge guarding, Roy's has the opposite use of being a combo starter, so instead of sending opponents away, it moves the opponent upward in the air, making it Roy's best combo starting tool. You'll commonly see Roy hold crouch cancel and waiting for a down tilt opening. It's one of the best ways of getting in with him. Roy's forward smash is actually rewarding. Now, it could have been even better if the hilt hitboxes were the same level of knockback as Marth's tipper, but again, it's still fine the way it is, I guess. Nonetheless, it's a great move, especially for punishing. Just don't spam it because it does have more end lag and startup compared to Marth's forward smash. Roy's special moves are stronger than Marth's. We've seen his up special destroy Jigglypuff on Yoshi's Story. I'm sure you guys have seen clips of this. It's a little buggy because the move does 200 set knockback. Roy's side B can cancel projectiles, it's a little neat, and Roy's neutral B does less shield damage compared to Marth's, but Roy's actually has plenty more damage and knockback, which means he can actually kill with neutral B. To be fair, you can still kill with Marth's neutral B, but I'm trying to throw Roy a bone here. His has more knockback potential. And yes, Roy's down special is actually way better than Marth's counter. Roy can actually KO with his because it has a 1.5 multiplier, so this move is actually great for beating smash attacks. Because Marth has the best non-tether grab in the game, that means Roy has the second best non-tether grab in the game. It's slightly nerfed compared to Marth's, but despite that, Marth and Roy's grab game is mostly the same. Roy's grabs do slightly more damage, and his back throw sends at a higher angle, which some people would say that's a nerf. It's important to note how different it is to play Roy compared to Marth. Despite the fact that they're clones, their moves are very similar but very different. And I give nothing but credit to the actual melee Roy mains out there. It's not easy as you're essentially playing a incomplete version of a top tier, it feels like. If you think because Zane played Roy that anyone can play this character, it's important to know that Zane is literally the best player in the world, and he probably has a pocket Bowser that would turn some heads. That goes to show though how difficult it is to play Roy. It's not easy. Plenty of people eventually just say whatever, I'm gonna play Marth instead. And when Roy was introduced in Smash 4, I feel like this was the version that Sakurai wanted to make the whole time. His animations were distinct, plenty of his moves were given complete facelifts. It's night and day different from the melee version. And even in Smash Ultimate, where Roy is literally a top tier character in that game. Now, why is this the case? It's because they figured out what character Roy is trying to be. Because let's be real, Roy was having a bit of an identity crisis in Melee. He shares many aspects with Marth while having not as much reward as him. Where in Smash 4 and Ultimate they gave Roy speed, KO power, range buffs. His aerials that were previously terrible before now are actually useful for comboing. He feels like a more fluid character with aggression and rushdown. They seem to have figured out the character and essentially made him a middle ground between Ike and Marth. He's a fast middleweight character with crazy buffs to his damage capabilities. It honestly makes me smile a bit that Roy is actually competitively viable after being bad in Melee. Thanos snapped out of Brawl, below average in Smash 4, and finally a top tier in Smash Ultimate.